If your snare drum sounds like this, instead of this, then you need to learn my must-know snare tuning formula. If you've been frustrated with a cheap, amateur-sounding snare that leaves you constantly shopping for a nicer, more expensive, hopefully better snare that you hope will solve your problems, then today's lesson is for you. Most beginner to intermediate, and maybe there's even some advanced drummers, make the mistake of assuming that a better, nicer drum is the secret to a better sound. And hey, I was definitely guilty of this too. But the truth is, you can make any cheap snare drum sound pretty awesome if you put new heads on it and you tune them right. Today you'll learn my 5-step complete formula for going from putting on the brand new head, getting the head ready, to getting it tuned up so that the drum is perfectly in tune with itself so that it sounds amazing. So that you now have an awesome sounding snare drum that inspires you, even if it's a cheap drum, and you have confidence in a repeatable tuning method you can use for any drum and definitely every snare. You can do this. Hey, welcome to The Non-Glamorous Drummer. I'm so glad you're hanging out today. I help self-taught beginner drummers know what to practice so that you can nail songs and become the drummer that other people want to jam with and want to have in their band. And hey, a huge part of that is knowing what to practice. The biggest struggle that I hear from so many students, and especially beginners, is I don't know what to practice. What do I practice? And if you're asking that question, that probably means you're not growing. That's why you're asking the question. You feel stuck, you feel stagnant, you don't know what to practice in order to grow. I don't want that to be you. I want to help you solve this. I've got a quick, simple, free PDF e-guide in the description below. Guess what it's called? Know What to Practice. It's my Know What to Practice 30-minute-a-day system. If you're a beginner, all you got to do is follow this guide every day. What we do is we break up all of drumming skill into 3 main categories. And as long as you're working in each of the 3 main categories daily, even if it's just for 30 minutes total, you're going to grow. No more second guessing, no more losing confidence and wondering if you're stuck. You won't be stuck anymore, you're gonna grow. And then you can do, you can practice whatever else you want to on top of that if you want to, knowing that you've got a core routine that is going to deliver automatic, consistent results. It's kind of like having an exercise or workout routine. You know you're going to get stronger if you just do that every day. And so that's what this does for you. Go grab it. It's your 30-minute-a-day beginner PDF for automatic and quick growth. So you're having fun, you're growing again. My free gift to you, grab it in the description. So question for you before we dive in here, and part of this question is just to be ironic since we're not actually talking about gear really, we're talking about how to make the most of what you have. But here's what I want to know from you. Tell me in the comments. What do you think is the ideal snare size, 5 inches deep or 6.5 inches deep? We're assuming, standard 14-inch diameter snare, but the debate among drummers is always depth. Deeper or shallower? Which do you think is better? Which is more ideal? Which do you like more, 5-inch deep or 6.5-inch deep? This whole thing is a huge debate, but it's pretty controversial, and it's interesting the different responses you hear depending on who you ask. So I'll tell you my answer at the end of the lesson today. Tell me yours in the comments. So here we go. I hope you're ready. Grab your snare to follow along with me. Here are the 5 steps to getting your snare perfectly in tune. I'll go ahead and preview for you. Here are the 5 steps, and then we'll break them down in detail. Number 1 is the bizarre trick that helps a new head fit well on the shell. You'll feel like you're tearing up the head, but it works. Second step is the controversial method for getting the head in tune with itself. I say controversial because it seems like nobody else does this, and so there's bound to be disagreement, but yet this works really, really well. Step 3, the wacky move that helps a head hold its tuning. You'll feel like you're going to tear up the drum and tear up the head, but this works. Step 4, the secret to the drum actually sounding awesome in the end. This is where we talk about how are we tuning the heads relative to each other, because that has a huge impact on final drum sound. And then step 5, the drum will still sound like garbage if you don't do this. We're talking about this final important piece of the puzzle. If you miss this, it won't matter how good of a drum you have and how well you tune it, it's still going to sound bad. But then we'll get into a bonus step of talking a little bit about muffling and this jingly thing you always see in my videos. What is this thing for? What does it do? So we'll talk about that too. Okay, so at this point, I've loosened all of my lugs here, so I'm ready to tune up. If you need to replace the head on your drum, that's obviously the first thing to do. Completely take the rim off, put a new head on. I have an Evans UV1 on here. It's kind of a bright, sizzly kind of head. I also really like the Remo Coated Ambassador, industry standard snare head. So if your head is, dinged up and it's not in great shape, maybe it's time to put a new head on, because sometimes your drum will only sound so good until you replace the head. But once you do that, you can catch up to where I'm at right now. I'm not switching out the head. I've just got my lugs all loose. So what I want you to do, we've got to make sure we're all starting at the same point here. We've got our new head on. We've put the rim back on. We've put the screws in, but they're not all the way, they're not screwed down yet to where there's any tension. They're still loose. Like we can jiggle each one of these. Each one of these can be jiggled. Everything is totally loose. We have to make sure we're all starting together there. Now also, I've already tuned up the bottom head. We're skipping over that for sake of time today. Everything we do with the top head, you can repeat with the bottom head. We'll talk about how tightly we're tuning that bottom head later, and it'll all make sense. But for today's lesson, we're not going to actually tune it in real time. We're just going to focus on this top head. So our step one, this is the bizarre trick that helps a new head fit well on the shell. This you can actually do before you put the head on the drum, and so that's why I've got a separate head to show this to you. So if you grab your head like this and you hold on to it here, you'll notice the rim is very stiff, and it kind of makes this crackling sound if you push on it. So something that helps, especially with, it does depend on the type of head, but I've noticed like with Remo heads, sometimes certain heads don't seat really well right off the bat. Sometimes they don't want to sit nicely on the shell the way they ought to. This right here, doing this, feeling like you're breaking the head, because you are breaking some glue and snapping some stuff, loosening up the edge of the head, this will help it sit more properly, sit more snugly on the shell that you put it on. And so this is our first step of going around and punching in the head with your thumbs. You'll feel like you're going to break something, you're going to tear it up. You won't, it'll be fine. So go all the way around. Once you're done, you might find you can actually like turn the head almost inside out. That's how you know you've done this well and you've thoroughly loosened up the rim so you're ready to go. So that'll help it sit really well on whatever shell you're putting it on, whereas maybe before it wouldn't quite get on there. Now it'll get on there more loosely. And also it's going to tune up better that way because you've kind of already stretched the edges, and so you've just prepared the head. And so that's one of those funky little things that can make a difference, especially depending on what kind of head you're using and what shell you're putting it on. And so that's worth mentioning as a almost a pre-step, even though it's our step one. If you've got a new head, do that and then put the head on. Now, step number two, the controversial method for getting the head in tune with itself. So normally what a lot of people will say is either press down right here and then tune up until the wrinkles go away, or use one of those things that measures the pressure of the head and then tune each up to that pressure, or just sit here and go back and forth, or do diamonds back and forth. There's all those typical methods you're going to find in a lot of YouTube videos, and they all have plenty of views, and those are the things we've all heard. But the problem is that we need to make sure that we're getting an even pitch at each lug. We need to make sure we're tuning each lug to the exact same note as we go. Otherwise, we'll end up in trouble if we start tuning one too tight and the other not tight. Something else, another common method here that really doesn't work very well for this is finger tightening. That's a very common approach. Finger tighten and then start tuning up with the keys. Well, the problem with finger tightening is that each lug might kind of have a different tension. There could be a little bit of rust on a screw. There could be more oil or lubricant on one screw than another. So as you finger tighten, one of them might get twice as high in pitch as the other, even though they feel the same. And that's a problem. So we don't actually want to use that method. That's why instead, we're not going to finger tighten. What we are going to do is make sure that we've twisted these down to right before they start to put any tension on the rim. So in other words, extremely loosely, we're twisting them until, okay, that's settling there. Like if we start going further, there's going to be tension. Right now, we don't want to put any pressure on the rim. We just want to have all the screws ready to put pressure on the rim. And then we're not going to finger tight. Instead, we're just going to listen. So everything is prepared now. So what we're going to do, get your tuning key and just pick a lug. So this is a 12 lug snare drum. Generally speaking, the more lugs you have, the easier it is to get the drum in tune with itself. The fewer lugs, the harder. This rack tom I have right here is a 5 lug drum compared to this 10 lug drum. 5 versus 10. This rack tom is really hard to get in tune with itself because it's tough. With just 5 lugs, it's like you're chasing stuff around. This snare drum though is great because there's 10 lugs. So if you happen to have a 10 lug snare, awesome. Normal, regular snares have 8 lugs, which is easy too. And so you've got 8 lugs, so you can think of, you can count as you're going, or you can make a mark, or you can number, whatever you want to do to keep track of where you're going. I'm going to start on this one right here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to slowly start to turn the key as we're tapping, but what we're listening for is a change in pitch. As soon as we hear a slight change, we stop and we move on to the next one. And we'll do a star pattern. We'll move across to here and then there, then there. But each time we're only tuning up until we hear a difference in the note. So right now we hear nothing, right? It's just all flat. So we start to hear something. It's ever so slight. As soon as you hear a change, okay, move to the next one. So we're going across. You hear that? Slight change. Hardly anything, but slight change. So we're done. Move across to the next one, which is right here. Yeah, we're starting to hear a slight difference. So now we're going to move over to here. Ever so slight. Move down to here. And some of them you might hear a difference more quickly than others, and you'll be like, wow, I barely turned that, or wow, I had to turn that a lot. That's okay. Move up to this one. Kind of got this microphone in the way here. That one, like, it didn't take much. Once we start to complete our first lap, it doesn't take much at all. Now we're moving down here. Slight difference. Not much at all. Now we're moving down here. And then here. Okay. So we've done our full lap. We've done 10 of these. So the next step, this is where it gets interesting. Our step number 3 is the wacky move that helps the drum hold its tuning. This is where you take the drum off the stand, off your lap, wherever you have it sitting, and you stand on the drum. Now, I went to a tuning master class a while back, and the guy who was teaching it demonstrated this, and he stood on the drum, and he was over 200 pounds. He was not small. He's a big guy, and the head did not break. The drum did not collapse, like nothing crazy happened. Even if you're over 200 pounds, you can stand on your drum and it's going to be fine. Drums are built to withstand this stuff. There's a lot of force that goes into a drum when you hit it with a stick. So unless you're doing a single ply head, I recommend you stand on it to stretch the head. What we want to do is stretch the head to help it seat well. Otherwise, as soon as you hit a rim shot, it's going to detune. So we want to be stretching it, especially if it's a new head, as we go. So yeah, you can do this. You can do the CPR thing. But if you stand on it, you'll really cut to the chase and you'll much more quickly get it stretched and in place. So I like to take my shoes off, just stand on it in my socks. And if you are a small person, obviously it's not going to do a ton. If you're over 200 pounds, it's not going to break the drum. Use your discretion, but know that if it's a double ply head, like this one is, you're going to be fine. If you do a Remo Ambassador, so technically an Ambassador is a single ply 10 mil, just be gentle with it. Maybe you don't put all your weight on it. You kind of step toward it and start to put weight on it. So use your best judgment and do this carefully. If you're doing, and hold on to something as you're standing on your snare. Don't fall off of your snare while you do this. If you're doing a floor tom, or like if you're doing other drums that do have double ply heads, you can practically jump on it because it's a double ply head. But if you're doing a thinner, like a single ply head on your snare, then maybe instead of putting all your weight on it, put a little bit on there. But the point is we want to stretch it as much as we can and know that it can withstand a whole bunch of pressure, even more than you can put on it doing the CPR thing. So this head right here is already stretched. I'm going to do a little CPR as we go, but if you've got a new head, definitely stand on it. You'll feel like you're going to break it, but it's going to help the drum hold its tuning so much better and get stretched as you go. And after you do that, you might realize, wow, it feels like it's super loose again. It's like we're starting from square one all over again. So this is where we're really going back to step 2 here of continuing the same method of tuning the head up and making sure we're getting it in tune with itself. So let's hop down here to this lug. Remember, we're going to turn gradually until we hear a slight change. There it is. Back to here, which is where we started. So what we want to do now is listen. Okay, is it in tune with itself? Sounds pretty close to me. Sometimes it's hard to tell when it's low. I'm also listening through my in-ears and through all these mics. But as you tune it higher, it'll become obvious if it's not in tune. So what we'll do at this point is we'll grab both of our keys, and now we'll just do 2 at a time going around so we can save a little bit of time. The important thing here is that you're turning the same distance with each. So like make sure you're not tuning a quarter term with one and a half term with the other. We want to make sure we're keeping it, in tune with itself as we go higher. If you happen to have one of those devices, I forget what they're called, where you like put the whole Pi disc thing on here and you can crank it around. That's the way to do this fast once you get it connected, knowing that you're tuning each lug the same. But without that, we're just doing 2 keys. We'll do small turns, probably about quarter turns, but we're just making sure to turn each one the same distance, no matter how each one feels. Like one might feel stiffer than the other, but we're making sure to still treat them the same. So that was it, that was 5. Sounds like we're pretty in tune. And like I said, if you've got a 10 lug drum, this is that much easier. If your drum is an 8 lug, if it's super cheap, and if the bearing edge isn't even or if the shell isn't round, this is where it can get a little trickier. And you might find like, okay, I'm having to tune this one up more to compensate for it. Or this one keeps staying, like this one gets too high. Okay, you got to tune that one down. Anytime you tune something down, re-press, re-stand on it, do the CPR. If you tune something down and then continue bringing up. At this point though, so do whatever you got to do. If you're tapping around, you realize. If you realize, okay, this one's low, just bring it up a little bit. If you realize this one's high, bring it down a little bit, then press near it to make sure it's reseated. But at this point, okay, where the head is in tune with itself, that's the biggest thing. The reason why this drum sounded so horrible was because I intentionally tuned it out of tune with itself. 3 of the lugs are really high, the others are low, there's one that's like super dead. And so if you're listening to your drum and you're hearing, it helps too if you muffle the middle. Some of those are a little bit lower than others, and so it's just going to sound like a mess if it's not in tune with itself, or if there's just one that's awkwardly high or one that's awkwardly low. So that's why it's so important to get the drum in tune with itself, and then everything else really is pretty straightforward. So what's great is at this point, all we've got to do is decide how high do we want to tune the drum, and it's all straightforward because we've just got our 2 keys and we're gradually tuning up. This is where if you have a tool like a TuneBot, this can be helpful. I have 2 different apps that I like to use on my phone. The first one is just a metronome app called Tempo Advanced that has a tuner that'll just play a note like that. The other is an app called ClearTune. I got to hunt down on my phone here. ClearTune is really cool because you can hit a drum and it'll tell you what the note is, or you can like sing a note to it, play a note on a guitar, whatever, and it'll tell you what the note is. And comparing this with students of mine who have a TuneBot, this tends to be more, I don't want to say more accurate or more thorough, but just simpler to use and more helpful. So you can get a TuneBot if you want it. I'm not at all knocking TuneBots. I've not personally used one, but on calls with students where they've got the TuneBot going, I'm using this. This ends up being simpler, and they're like, oh, I like what you're doing with that. That's so simple. So if you want to go the route of saving some money and going simple, just download the ClearTune app. I think it's a couple of bucks, and it's great. It'll do the same thing. But really, all we need today is this one that's going to produce the tone. Any basic tuner app or metronome app will probably have this. So how are we deciding the note that we want to tune to? Well, this is step 4. Step 4 is the secret to the drum actually sounding awesome in the end. So what we want to make sure that we do is we tune the top head a 4th or 5th apart from the bottom head. Now, if you know anything about tonal music, like piano, you know that a 4th would be like C to F or D to G. A 5th would be C to G or D to A. It doesn't matter whether a 4th or a 5th because they're technically the same, especially when we're talking drums. So what we're going to do here for this drum, I have my bottom head tuned to an E, and we're going to tune the top head to the B below that E, which is a 4th. Now you could tune anywhere. You could tune really high, you could tune really low, and as long as that ratio is a 4th or a 5th, the drum's going to sound awesome. It's going to sound punchy. We won't get into why other ratios don't work. You can experiment with that, but if you try to tune in octaves, unisons, thirds, if you try to do other stuff, it just doesn't sound as good. There's, I'm sure, a whole bunch of physics behind it that I don't understand. But in my experience and in other drummers' experience as well, tuning a 4th/5th apart is what lends the best tone and best punch and body from the drum. If you feel like your drum lacks body, punch, depth, fullness, it's probably because you haven't tuned the heads a 4th or 5th apart. So we've already tuned the bottom head to an E. We're going to now tune the top head to the B right below that. And that's kind of a mid-range tuning. I think if the top head's tuned to a B, the snare's kind of mid. It's not too low, it's not too high. It's kind of just a good mid-range, and that's what you've heard in the last couple of videos that I've made. Let's hear where we're at. So if we listen to it. Boom, 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 boom. We're pretty close to an E. So right now we're really low. E is very low. Like if you tune your top head to an E, a low E, that's going to be a very low, beefy sound. So we want to bring this up. So let's just continue. We're not going to do anything crazy, just quarter turns, gradually bring it up, because we don't want to overshoot, and we're not in a hurry here. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom, boom. We're now at a G. G is kind of what I would consider like a low mid tuning. I really like tuning to a G playing at church. Just have that low beefy snare that still has a little bit of crack, but it's a little below where we want to go. G might be too low for you, so we'll go a little bit higher. We want to get up to that B. Still doing quarter turns here. We're now to B flat. B flat, so we're very close to the B. We don't need to go much more at all. Just some slight turns here. You can see how little I'm pushing these keys. A little bit goes a long way. That's pretty close. We're still slightly below it. I'm gonna go a tiny bit more, just barely. I wonder if I missed one at some point. This sounds a little low to me. Okay, now, here's what's interesting. As you're tuning your bottom head and your top head, so we've now tuned our top head to the B, we want to tune the bottom head to the E above that, which I told you I've already done. You can follow these same steps for the bottom head. The only difference is don't stand on your bottom head. Like I said, use your judgment. You're smart. You know not to stand on the super thin bottom head that will break because it's incredibly thin. Know that with that one, you can just be a lot more gentle when seating it and just make your pressure more gentle. That's less critical with that head. Because also it's not going to be getting hit, so it's not going to detune easily, and you're rarely going to have to touch that bottom head once you've gotten it in place. Nor do you really need to replace it that often. Once you're happy with it, just leave it, don't worry about it. What's interesting here, when we're talking about the tuning of the top head versus the bottom head, is that the pitch that we hear when we hit the snare, if we have the snares on, is coming from the top head. That means that B. There's our B. Now what's interesting, remember the bottom head is tuned to an E. If we turn the snares off, do you hear that E? Here's the E. Especially if I muffle the edge gently. So the top head is, the bottom head is, can you hear that? And so what's cool is you can check the ratio of the heads without touching the bottom head. You can sit here and just gently tap. And you can hear, especially with a mallet like this, boom, 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 you can now hear the note that's coming from the bottom head. So what's interesting, I know I keep saying interesting because I think this is interesting. I hope you find this interesting too. What's interesting is that when you're tuning toms, the note that you hear is not coming from the top head, it's coming from the bottom head. The same is true with the snare if the snares are off. But what happens when you turn the snares on, it mutes that bottom head, and we now hear the note from the top head. And of course, as you're playing, you're hearing a little bit of both, but the note from the top head overcomes the note from the bottom when the snares are on. And the note from the bottom, you end up hearing both when you have the snares off. Ba ba boo 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 boo. You can hear both of those. When you're playing more softly, you hear that the note from the bottom, the lower note, it's tuned, the bottom head's tuned higher, by the way, but we're perceiving that as a lower note. And as you hit harder, you start to hear more of that resonance from the top head, which is perceived as the higher note. So what's really cool is that if you choose to flip your snares off, your snare still sounds really good because you've got this nice harmonic, this nice harmony between the two heads because they're tuned a fifth or a fourth apart. Whereas if you were to tune the bottom in any such way, whatever random note, when you turn the snares off, it might not sound so nice. And so that's why that's important. That's why any LA drum doctor, any drum tech who knows what they're doing, this is what they're going to tell you, because if the drummer turns off the snares, it still needs to sound good. That's where the tuning of the bottom head really comes in and is important. So we can then turn the snares on, decide what tension we want here. By the way, if you hit really, really hard, it can sharpen the note just a little bit, but not really enough to perceive too much. But hey, this sounds pretty good, right? So we got the head prepared, the drum in tune with itself. We made sure everything is seated and stretched right. We've got the ratios right. What's the final piece of the puzzle here? Step number 5, the drum will still sound like garbage if you don't do this. What is the final thing? So if you were paying attention way back at the very beginning, when I hit the bad sounding drum, how did I hit it? I didn't play a nice rim shot hitting in the middle. I intentionally hit it about right here, which sounds horrible. If you hit your snare off center, especially with this power center reverse dot, if you hit off of that dot, it's gonna sound all ringy and wacky, and if one of these lugs is off, it's gonna accentuate that. However, if you hit this drum in the middle, it sounds less bad, right? It still sounds terrible because it's all out of tune. But it sounds worse if I hit off center than it does if I hit on center. So likewise, with our well-tuned drum here, if I hit off center, you hear how sloppy that is. If I hit all over the place and at different dynamics, this is no good. So what is our 5th important step here? The drum will still sound like garbage if you don't hit it well. You could have the best tuned drum. You could spend all the dollars on the really nice Ludwig Copperphonic, an awesome drum, but it still sound bad, even if you tune it right. In other words, you could go sit down in a Nashville studio at the best sounding drum set that's been on Grammy Award winning country records and start hitting it, and if you're not hitting it well, it's still gonna sound bad. That's why a snare drum will sound totally different depending on which drummer hits it, because different drummers have different ways of hitting it. But here's the rule of thumb. Hit the center. You can hit rim shots or not rim shots, but at least hit the middle of the drum. Or if you want to be a little louder with some more crack, play rim shots. Just practice those over and over again. Practice playing them evenly and consistently, and your drum will sound way more professional no matter the drum. That's why you could put a professional drummer on a bad sounding kit and they'll still sound pretty good, versus a bad drummer on a great sounding kit who will not sound good. So keep that in mind. That is so critical. Practice playing your backbeats. And you know, even if your right hand is moving around playing timekeeping in different places, practice hitting the middle of the drum. When you play fills, practice hitting the middle of the drum. That kind of precision takes some time, and you'll find, okay, every once in a while I'm sloppy, every once in a while I hit off center. It's okay, take it easy, but do your best to get more precise with this and draw a circle in the middle of the drum. Measure out the center of your drum head and put an X there. That way you have something to aim for. It seems silly and amateur, but it really does help, and I do it every time I put a new head on my drum, just as a visual reference. That'll help you a bunch. Okay, bonus step here. Muffling. What is the jingly thing for? So you can hear a difference with this. The jingly thing basically functions like a gate to shorten the sound of the snare drum. So you've been hearing the full ringiness without it. And this is a very bright ringy head, the Evans UV1. If I drop this on here, it just tames it. And so to me, I like that sound better. I don't love a super ringy snare, and so I would rather have the jingly thing. It's just cleaner, more tight, but still very cutting and precise, and it almost makes it feel like there's more attack because the sound is shorter. So that's what the jingly thing is. You can make your own with any kind of jewelry, any metallic object. Just have a metallic object rest on the drum, and what happens is when you hit the drum, it hops up for a second, like a tiny distance off the head, full frequency, full sound from the drum, then it drops back on there, shortening the sound like a gate. So you can go the tape route. You can put tape on a drum, you can put other things on there, but what those things will do is gradually kill off the higher frequencies. And the reason why the pitch seems to go down with something like a big fat snare, which I don't have on hand here, but I have some homemade ones. The reason why the pitch of the drum drops with this is because you can hear the difference there. What happens is it's actually muffling those higher frequencies that we're hearing from the top head. So now we're hearing more of that perceived lower note from the bottom head. And just as we put more weight on the head, it lowers the frequencies created by that head and so on. So you'll find that you can accomplish the same thing with tape. The more tape you put on there, the lower the perceived note, because you're also hearing more of that full drum note. You're hearing more of what's coming from the bottom head, and you're just killing a lot of those higher frequencies. And so that's what's happening. But if you want to preserve all the high frequencies, that's where the metallic object really comes in. So the point is, tune your drum so that it sounds awesome, then use muffling to enhance that or change the sound. So if I want this to sound really mellow and thuddier, boomier, then I might put some tape on there. I might, throw one of these on there. I'll have to make another video about these specifically. These are homemade and they're very intentional in their sizes. We'll talk about that another time. You can totally make your own. No need to buy a big fat snare, and I actually like these more than big fat snare. But the point is, you can do whatever you want to with muffling once you've got the snare drum sounding awesome. That way you're not muffling to get rid of something or to fix something. You're muffling to change the sound, to make it better, to enhance it, and to get it more of where you want it. You'll notice a lot, well, actually I say that I don't have any muffling on my toms. Usually if I'm playing in a live setting or if I'm recording, I'll put some tape on my toms just to tame them a little bit. Otherwise, here where I'm just making YouTube videos, I love having ringy, boomy toms. I think it's a lot of fun. So muffle to taste. Nothing wrong, just decide what kind of sound you like. So I hope at this point, your cheap snare sounds awesome. I hope you're able to tune confidently with a repeatable method that you can do on any drum, any snare drum. You can do this over and over again. So now you know what you're doing. You know how to get the drum in tune. You know what ratio to tune to. And as far as how high or low to tune, B is a really good note to aim for with a top head. If you want to do a good low tuning, do G. If you want to do a high tuning, go up to like a D. But of course, you can go extreme either way with this. Just whatever you do with the top head, tune the bottom head a fourth or a fifth higher, and it'll sound awesome. So you've got this nice repeatable method you can use. So now you know how to tune, and you can get great results from any drum. And so I hope you now feel more like a real drummer. I hope you were inspired by your instrument. I hope you like the sound of your snare now, because there's nothing worse than playing a gig with a bad snare sound that drives you nuts. You're going to play so much better with a snare sound you like. So speaking of snare, our question earlier, what do you think is the ideal snare size? 5 inches deep or 6.5 inches deep? So this is so funny because I always wanted a 6.5 inch, and I have one. This is a 6.5 inch. And if I asked any drummer, they're like, oh, 6.5, definitely. That way you get all that depth, you get that beefiness, you get that body. But every producer and audio engineer that I asked that same question to, they were like, oh, I just use the 5. I said, okay, why? They're like, well, you can't hear the difference. So when you record it, you can't hear the difference between the 6.5 and the 5. What they also told me was, yeah, I ended up getting the 5 because I was shopping for them online, and the 6.5s, either I couldn't find them, or they're all out of stock, or they cost twice as much. The 5 inches were always cheaper, they're always more available. Why is that? Because drummers are always getting rid of 5-inch ones, and they're always wanting 6.5-inch ones because drummers think they're getting more depth and body and beef from a 6.5-inch drum, whereas producers know that there's actually no difference. So my opinion on this, I like a 6.5-inch drum because there's something psychological about it. It feels like, oh yeah, I can land it. I can get extra depth out of it. But whatever difference might be there is so imperceptible, especially in a recording studio or especially in a live setting, that it just does not make a difference. You can get just as much low end and depth out of this drum. This one I think is a 5.5-inch. Than I can out of my 6.5-inch. And this one even sounds better. Like, I think this is the better sounding drum, the wood drum compared to the steel drum. Subjective, my personal preference. But ultimately, it does not matter. It does not matter if you get a 6.5-inch deep or a 5-inch deep. You can tune either one of those, the same ratios, the same thing, everything we talked about today applies either way. Tune the same ratios, you can go just as low, just as high. It does not matter. Producers and engineers know the truth. Drummers swear by the 6.5, but hey, get yourself a 5. You'll save some money and you'll probably have an easier time like finding a used Black Beauty if you go the 5-inch route instead of the 6.5. All right, I hope you've enjoyed today's lesson. I hope this has been helpful. This has been long and step by step, and like hopefully I haven't left out any details and you're able to learn a lot. I hope this has been helpful to you and you've got your cheap snare sounding amazing. Stay non-glamorous. Know that you can do this. I'll see you on the next lesson.